I made the whole stand out of materials I already had. These are the legs from the headboard and baseboard of one of the kids' old beds. The good thing about these is that they're factory finished, so they're pretty accurate for square and size. So these pieces are going to be the legs for the mobile tool stand. I cut them down to final height using my cross-cut sled on the table saw. Here I'm making a 10mm shoulder cut at one end of each leg because there's going to be a rebate at the top of each leg for 2 horizontal rails. To cut the rest of the rebate, I'm using my tenon jig. You can see a brief description of how I made this jig by clicking the link on the screen. The bottom of the frame uses mortise and tenon joinery, so the first thing to do was mark the position of the mortise on one of the pieces. I attached my mortising jig to my router and set the fences for the width of the mortise, and then use that setup to cut all the mortises. Using that leg piece I just marked up, I set up a temporary fence on the drill press and drilled out the bulk of the mortise on each piece. I have to apologise here for the bad camera angle. I didn't realise the depth locking lever was going to get in the way. This mortising jig makes it quick and easy to set the desired width of your mortise relative to your bit and then make repeatable cuts on all your pieces. And because it uses 2 fences, there's no chance of drift. I'll leave a link at the end of the video on how I built it. To make the bottom rails for the tool stand, I just used some old framing pine I had and just cleaned it up on the table saw to get rid of the rounded corners and rough surface to give it a nicer look. Now it was time to cut the tenons on the ends of these rails, so I started by making the shoulder cuts all the way around on both ends. And then using my tenoning jig again, I made the cheek cuts to all the pieces. As you can see, this jig sits over the table saw fence and is easily adjusted by simply repositioning the fence. The remaining shoulder cuts were made using the bandsaw. I just finished off these tenons with rasp file. Just basically did it by hand, rounded off those sharp corners so that it would fit into the mortises that were cut by the router. We just fit these 2 pieces together. Just something to be conscious of when you're cutting 2 mortises in a leg piece like this at 90 degrees to each other is to just watch the depth of your mortises. As you can see there, mine are probably about 6mm or 1/4 inch too deep and they've encroached onto each other. Now it's not a big deal. Once I insert that in there, you'll see that the very edge of that tenon is now inside this mortise, which is going to stop this other side rail inserting fully into the piece. So yeah, so just something to be aware of. All I'm going to do is just mark that with my pencil there and there, and I'll just cut that little corner off, just the two side rail pieces with the bandsaw, and it's problem solved. Once I was happy with the fit of all the pieces, I glued the base together. Next part to make was the top rails. These were going to be much longer than the base because I want to use a single long board in the thicknesser as the bed rather than using the fold down wings that it came with. This is some reclaimed hardwood I had, and I used this because of the width of these boards. The top rails of the stand are about 1500mm long, so I wanted some wide boards that wouldn't sag. I milled and dressed these rails in the usual way, but before I finished them in the thicknesser, I thought this was a good time to insert that extra long table I spoke about into the machine. After sliding this length of melamine into the machine, I used screws from underneath the wings to secure it in place. Once these rails were all milled up, I screwed them in place and then finished gluing the base together. I let the base glue up for a while and then fitted casters to the bottom of each leg. At first I wasn't going to use glue on the top rails, but I changed my mind. To finish tying the whole frame together, I added these short pieces between the top rails. To transfer the position of all these holes to the frame so I could drill pilot holes, I just used the same drill bit with only a little bit of pressure in each hole to leave a mark on the frame. So I'm just making up these small brackets to support the ends of that melamine board that runs through the planer. So I'm just going to use these to be able to adjust the heights on the end so that the board sits flat the whole way through the planer. So fairly simple. All I'm doing is two pieces like that, and then there's going to be another one just sitting flush at the top there. Okay, so to set up the alignment of this extended table that I'm going to put into the thicknesser, what I've done first of all is I've got those two aluminium bars or extrusions running through the machine. Now I know that those are very flat and very straight. I've brought the cutter head mechanism or the whole assembly down, and I've put pressure on those bars so that they're sitting flat on the table that's inside the machine. So then they extend out towards the end of the board, and as you can see, the further we get out, there's a little bit of sag there. So the idea with these brackets is that they're going to get screwed inside these two rails here, and they'll just be lifted up so that they bring this melamine to sit flush and flat underneath that that aluminium. And once I've got that sitting there, they're just going to be screwed off in place. I'll have one here, one in the centre of this outfeed section, and just one at the infeed. The infeed's a lot shorter. With the stand now complete, it was time for a little paint. After the paint dried, I reattached the casters, bolted the thickness planer down to the stand, and then just moved it into place. So when I chose to put the machine in this area here, I wanted to raise the machine up as high as it would go, just to save my back basically bending over. I didn't want to be bending over too far, so I brought it up as high as I could, and that just came up with one issue, and that was the height adjustment handle, which sits on that shaft there. Now that's the height adjustment handle there, so as you can see, that was never going to work. But to overcome that, I just built this different type of height adjustment handle. Very, very simple, just a piece of timber there, nicely shaped. That handle there, it's got a screw in it. The screw's done almost all the way up, so that will still rotate. And on the end of that steel tube, I've just flattened off one section so it'll match the top of that shaft. And basically that just goes on there. And yeah, problem solved. And when I'm not using the machine, the thicknesser, I just pull it out so it doesn't interfere with the tabletop. And I've left the shaft sticking out about an inch or so. The reason for that is so I can put my battery drill on there. So if I want to move the cutter head up or down quite a bit and do it very quickly, just whack the battery drill on that, and I can wind that up and down.